Good good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to episode 41 of Radio Europa. I'm your host, Will, and I'm joined by Darth tonight. It's just the two of us. We're going to talk about, as the title suggests, the climate rebellion protests and the shitposting MEPs or potential MEPs. So, hi, Darth. You all right?
You all right, mate?
Yeah, so I've been away from this for a while, so I guess we should probably just get straight into it. I think we probably do well to talk about the climate rebellion first because it's been the most prominent issue in the media, particularly in the UK, in the last week or couple of weeks. So I guess, Darth, if you want to just give an overview, I mean, most people will already know, but if you want to just give a quick overview of what's going on there.
Sure. So I think the main things is kind of what they are and who they are. I think we've all seen what they've been doing. They describes itself as a non-violent direct action and civil disobedience group. So they do things to get attention and try to get as many of their members arrested as possible for attention. They want the UK to reduce carbon emissions to zero, yes, zero, by 2025, and do more to, quote, remove the excess atmospheric greenhouse gases. So from April 15th, they've been taking action mainly in London, bringing various parts of the city to a standstill by blocking routes around London. They also staged a protest outside Heathrow Airport, an attempt to try and get it to be shut down. What else have they done? They lay down underneath the famous blue whale skeleton in the middle of one of the large London museums. So basically, they've just been causing a lot of mess and a lot of issues for the travellers within London, to highlight the fact that they think the government's not doing enough to tackle climate change. That's probably the best summary I can give.
Well, it's good, and there's a lot of points in there we could talk about, and one that springs to mind is the hypocrisy. But before we get into that, I don't know if it's the cynic in me or I've just been watching these things for too long, but it seems as if they're so well organized and they've just come out of nowhere, and it seems like there's an element of manufacturedness, if that's a word, to this. I don't know what you think about that. Whether you think that there's anything like that going on.
Well, apparently they've been around since last year. So that it's not like they created themselves 2 weeks ago. They've apparently existed since last year. I now can't find where it was that I read that, but it's not like the organization has been around for 5 minutes. Obviously, they're a relatively new organization, but it's more so just everything that they're doing to gain attention to themselves. Like Tuesday, April 16th, a pair of climate change protesters were camped out on a glass balcony above the entrance to Shell's HQ in London. Campaigners glued themselves to the entrance of Shell building and allegedly smashed glass in a bid to force the government to reduce carbon emissions to zero by 2025. And I'm all for I'm all for us, being nicer to the planet. But these guys remind me of, it's almost like the British equivalent of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with her Green New Deal. It's just insanely pie in the sky wants and dreams, which really are not achievable. If they turned around and said, we want to do things which are achievable, I think you'd probably get a lot more dialogue with politicians. But it's just insane what they're doing and what they're asking or demanding, should I say.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. When you were reading out some of their demands, because I didn't actually know all of them, and particularly reducing carbon emissions to zero by 2025. I mean, we're in 2019 now, and the kind of work that would have to go into reducing carbon emissions to zero by any date is just atmospheric. No pun intended, but it's atmospheric. It's huge. It's not deliverable.
Yeah, and I mean, like last year, the government had made the plan of, by 2040, all new cars that were made and bought would not be running on fossil fuels. And then I believe it was the Scottish government then decided they would try and do a game of one-upmanship and say that they were going to do it by 2030, the same kind of proposal. And that in of itself is radical because, the average car is probably on the road for between 8 and 10 years, if not longer. So what they're saying is by, in the next 20 years, all new cars are going to be non-fossil fuel, or at least hybrid anyway. And I mean, that's a big demand. Now, don't get me wrong, the way that technology is improving, these things probably technically are possible, but people are becoming so hysterical in what they want done that everything that is being suggested and demanded just seems increasingly insane.
Yeah, but that's interesting, isn't it? What the government's already planned to do regarding new cars, because it takes me back to an interview with Elon Musk that I watched recently, where he was talking about the challenge for Tesla being to reduce the price of the batteries for the cars so that they can be affordable cars for everybody. And I think, a lot of these climate change protesters, if they really want to contribute something useful, perhaps they should, go and get a job at Tesla or dedicate their allegedly bright young minds to reducing the cost of lithium-ion batteries, because it is the future. Electric cars are the future, but and that's a deliverable suggestion, I believe. So I think it's just a case of, rather than making virtue statements, it's about constructively looking at ways we can achieve these goals, I think.
Well, I mean, one of the things I remember being spoken about was I'd watched a documentary, this was many years ago, about the rise of Formula One and the technology improvements on the engine, the internal combustion engine, and the change. When they were first looking at cars for racing, it was something silly. They were developing, however many horsepower per litre, and by the time this documentary was being made, they were making 1 horsepower per cc. So the change and the improvement in technology amongst cars was improved dramatically through Formula One racing. So if you want, like you're saying, if you want to improve on lithium-ion batteries, you do it in a place where people have the incentive to invest, i.e., Formula E, something that's racing. So you turn around to Formula One and say, right, we're going to have, they always change up their rules. They reduce the engine size and they still get more power out of the engines. So if you have groups or organizations which are incentivized to explore the technology advancements to move towards electric cars, then you're going to see far faster technology advancements than if you have people gluing themselves to the front of petroleum HQs.
Well, that's absolutely right. I think it's that age-old adage that if you want something done, then it needs to either be during wartime or when there's profit to be made. So, yeah, I think you're right with that, and and also there are sort of just phenomenal industry leaders who are researching it off their own backs anyway, which is really good. I mentioned Elon Musk before, and there's others like him as well. So I think, generally speaking, I do think that these protesters are. It's a bit of a storm in a teacup, because the things that they want are going to happen, but just not. They're kind of like, we want it now. It's like, well, no, you can't have it now. You got to be, you got to be patient, children, and I think there's a lot of that. But the other issue that I wanted to raise on this, and I think we spoke about this just before we came on air, but nevertheless, I think it's important that we raise it here, and that's the hypocrisy, really, because as most of our listeners will know, that all of the ocean pollution in the world comes from rivers in the third world, or most of the carbon emissions and everything come from China, India, Africa, not the UK or Europe generally. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy there.
Well, yeah, and I mean the reason that most of the pollution is coming from the places you've mentioned and not here is because we're actually very good at recycling and, you know, being reasonably good stewards of the country that we have. Obviously, I mean, there's always room for improvement, but compared to countries where they are literally pouring, you know, items into their local rivers to get rid of them, you know, I think we're far better than countries like India and China, which are, you know, fastly developing countries. You know, they're going to be future superpowers. China is arguably already a superpower. And these are the countries that are causing most of the pollution. Yet it's us, you know, the Western Europe, the US, New Zealand, Australia are the ones that have to be clubbed by their own people into, you know, reducing their carbon footprint, you know, to the point where, you know, you're talking about plastic straws, you know, so McDonald's has got rid of their plastic straws and put in paper straws. I get the idea. I get, obviously it's a move in the right direction, but how much difference are we making when you have literally 2 or 3 billion people on the other side of the world are polluting on a scale which we, even if we wanted to, couldn't compete. You know, if this became a pollution contest, we probably couldn't compete because they're producing that much pollution and that much rubbish into the oceans.
Well, absolutely, we could never compete. I mean, there's only, even if you, the entire population of Europe is not even half that of India, one country. So, and China, they do pollute the atmosphere so badly, and the oceans. I mean, it's very much like you said. We can throw away all of our plastic straws, but for every plastic straw we throw away, somebody on the other side of the world dumps a ton of toxic material either into the air or into the rivers. But I mean, why do you think? I mean, I guess I kind of already know the answer, but why do you think that these protesters are they very easily ignore what is going on in China and India regarding pollution?
Because political correctness.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking too. So I think that's absolutely right.
And I was gonna mention something. I'd thought about this. I think I remember either having a conversation about this or just, you know, in my own thoughts. But you take the average, you know, working class person in the UK who lives month to month on, you know, they live paycheck to paycheck. You know, if some massive repair bill comes out of nowhere, their car breaks down or whatever, they're going to struggle for the next month. You take that average person and you turn around and say, we want you to start, you know, living in a way in which you are being more green, more helpful towards the planet, more environmental. That person's going to turn around and say, mate, I've got 3 kids to raise. I've got a job to go to. I'm working 60 hours a week to make ends meet. Me and my wife are struggling as it is, and you want me now to start living my life differently so I can improve the atmosphere slightly. You know, when the majority of the people in this country, you know, in a first world country, are more interested in genuine problems in their own life, let alone, you know, the problems of the world as a whole. And I get it, you know, people are going to turn around and say, well, if we can't take responsibility for it, who can? But you oftentimes find the people who are protesting on this are ones who can actually afford to take time off work and go out and protest in London and disrupt the people who are trying to get to their work to make ends meet. And they're the ones that are supposed to be being kowtowed and told, you must live better because we're telling you to.
Yeah, I think that's very much a good point to make about these protests, because if you look at the protests and you listen to the interviews of the people on them, then it's quite clear it's very much a middle class show, isn't it? And they're not the sorts of people that have the concerns in life that you mentioned, you know, living month to month and raising kids and things like that. They don't seem to have those worries holding them back. So, and I think I actually, when I was speaking to a good friend of mine about this recently, that the problem is that the reaction from the government to appease the protesters will be to slap a tax or something on, you know, a very reactionary nothing measure, which the only people that it's going to impact adversely are working class people who can't afford to worry about climate change. And what the protesters really want to see won't happen, but they'll be you know, brushed off with an appeasement measure which will just have unintended consequences, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, right now, everything, like you said, their answer to literally everything seems to be a tax. So the most recent one that they brought in is, the sugar tax. So, we'll make sugar more expensive to put people off buying, or living unhealthy lifestyles. But, when unhealthy foods and drinks are cheaper in general, I'm not going to say all the time, but cheaper in general than to buy a healthy, balanced diet. If people can afford to feed their family, on unhealthy foods, if that is the only thing that they can afford to buy, then they're going to do it. They're not going to worry about going out and spending 3 times the length of time doing their shopping to find, reasonably healthy food that's going to affect the environment less because they're being environmentally mindful. It just doesn't happen. I see it from my lines of work. People I come into contact with, they're not interested in that kind of thing.
No, and I think that's very, very true. You can't expect them to be either. The protesters and the government, they absolutely shouldn't expect normal people to be interested in this because, like you said, they have other worries that clearly take priority. Their family, their lives, their jobs, and you just can't expect them to think about this. And it kind of reminds me of something I heard Jordan Peterson say. I know this is going to be a point of contention because some people love him and some people hate him, but whatever. Jordan Peterson said about climate change. People who think they need to change the world should probably look at the things within their own control first, and I think that's very much true of everybody.
Correct. How can you expect to change the world if you can't, get your own matters and own matters or your own affairs under control? If you can't, as he says, cliche as it will, if you can't tidy your room, how do you expect to change the world? And I'm not for a second advocating that we shouldn't attempt to live better in our lives. I mean, if you look at the difference between now and 100 years ago, when there was smog on the streets of every main city in the UK because of the coal fires everybody had, we've obviously come, a massive distance in a way of cleaning up the atmosphere and cleaning up pollution. And there's always more to be done. But, like you're saying earlier on, when people are doing our best and the government is passing more and more authoritarian laws in regard to entering London, you have to pay congestion charges, etc. But when we're doing these kind of things and you're comparing it to China's opening up a coal-fired power plant every single day, how on earth are we expected to do better when you're seeing these things across the other side of the world, which pretty much are being ignored?
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think of, I agree with you that we should be trying to live better within our means. But it makes me think of the area of environmentalism that's so often overlooked, and that's, the basic things that you can see and touch: green spaces, forests, which we hardly have any forests anymore, and our green spaces are vastly, drastically diminishing. And that's something that's within our control to do it in our own country, and it's not going to cost anybody anything, to plant a few trees, save the cost
Yeah.
of the trees.
So right now on our video feed, there's a literal river of plastic running along the top of the river, and this is in some Middle Eastern, Far Eastern, possibly Indian subcontinent, and you're watching that and you're thinking, if that was happening on a regular basis here, there would be absolute outrage. Now, before people say, well, that's still happening here, sure, but in comparison, everything has to be taken. You've got to take everything with a pinch of salt. You've got to look at things in a relative manner. But I mean, even people say do a little. I mean, if you're able to plant a tree in your back garden, you are doing a small amount for the environment. If you are able to recycle, you're doing a small amount for the environment. If companies are incentivizing for you to recycle, great, but you can't change the world yourself, and you've just got to do your little bit for improving things.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm a big advocate of planting stuff. I think, one of the best ways we can help the environment is, you get those. It's more prevalent in rural communities, I suppose, but some people might be able to relate to this, where they often they want help planting trees on a Saturday, or planting something, hedgerows or something, on a Saturday morning. And that's something that's really, really positive. If people were to get out and do a bit more of that, just look, you don't have to dedicate any great effort to it. Just maybe a Saturday morning every few months. I think that's something that um, can go a long way if a lot of people get involved in it. But I think all of these unrealistic demands of emissions to zero by 2025, it's not worth it. We need to think locally and small, and things that people can actually do and control themselves, I think is the most important takeaway from that.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I think would probably go a long way is probably every single industrialised city in the UK has a massive area of what you would call brown land. Where it's
Like
old
brownfield or something.
old buildings, old industrial estates which have fallen into disuse. They're not being used. They're waiting to be regenerated. Most of the time, it ends up being houses or new office buildings are built there. If those places are regenerated in some kind of eco-friendly, or people are encouraged to build eco-friendly buildings, or some kind of facilities in which promotes green green technology or whatever,
Yeah.
those are the kind of things that will make a difference. But going to the government and saying we want, zero emissions by 2025, you're literally talking about 6 years from now. And Ocasio-Cortez over the other side of the Atlantic is saying we've got 12 years till the end of the world. In a figurative sense, I don't think she said. I think she's kind of backtracked slightly and said that the world is not literally going to end in 12 years' time. But
Yeah, I think it's the point
it's
of
the
no
fear
return,
mongering.
isn't it?
And I mean, Al Gore said that the world was going to have ended by 2016, and we're still here. And when you have these people who are very clearly trying to scaremonger, it then takes away from genuine attempts to do better for the world. When you've got people who are saying, if we don't change things now and get rid of airplanes altogether, then the world's going to end very, very shortly. And you're like, we would take you more seriously if you stopped, effectively saying the end is nigh, repent now for your sins, because the end of the world and the apocalypse is coming. It's that kind of, I see it as that kind of thing. It's the man on the side of the man in the corner of the street shouting repent, for the apocalypse is coming.
Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult to take people seriously when they are making these outlandish claims and then ridiculous demands to go with it. I mean, that Hispanic senator or whatever she is in the US, Cortez. I mean, some of I haven't read it all, but some of the things in that Green New Deal are just, from what I've heard, are just absolutely outrageous, and it just makes us unable to take them seriously.
Yeah, I mean, she was talking about either tearing down and rebuilding or refitting every single building in the United States to make it more carbon neutral, more eco-friendly, more green. So you think about how many buildings are in New York City alone, and they're ripping it out and making it eco-friendly. The amount of money they're going to have to spend on that is unbelievable, and just it's pie in the sky, ridiculous.
Yeah, it's badly thought through. But yeah, I mean, coming back to the protesters in London, I think one thing that I did want to ask you, actually, I want to see what you think about this, because this is something that I've had another conversation about as well. But the Extinction Rebellion lot, they are very committed. Clearly, they're very enthusiastic. They are prepared to go to quite extreme lengths. I think over 1,000 have been arrested since the protest began. Some of them have been remanded in custody, which is quite serious. So they're clearly committed. But there's the issue that I think people are more angry about at the moment is Brexit. But you don't see Brexiteers, even when they protest in large numbers, adopting any similar tactics. They're very well behaved. They're very, they're not prepared to get arrested. They're not prepared to be on the wrong side of the law. So What do you think are the differences that mean that two sets of people who are angry in their own way about different things behave differently when they protest?
I haven't had this discussion, but I see your point, see your question. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, to think on the spot. I mean,
sorry, I'm putting you on the spot a bit there.
No, you're fine, and forgive me, the audience, for thinking out loud here. But what I think is you have Brexit, which is ultimately a political. Both things are political, but Brexit is very toxic, very unpopular amongst both sides now. People are fed up with it, and everybody probably deep down knows that becoming more green is a good thing. We should be doing something to improve the Earth's status. Making it more eco-friendly, and people who are taking things to the extremes for carbon, to go against people's carbon footprint, to be more green. You're probably going to get more people who are silently applauding their efforts, even if they're going as far as getting themselves arrested, compared to people who get themselves arrested for Brexit. I mean, if you had hardcore Brexiteers getting themselves arrested, the headlines would simply be, these are racist troublemakers who want nothing more than to cause trouble to get their attention for Brexit to happen. Whereas you're going to get a lot more, I'm going to guess, left-leaning people will be applauding the Extinction Rebellion group because they are doing something which can be argued to be, moral and upstanding. Whereas it's harder to argue that Brexit is a moral and upstanding movement to fight for.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because Brexit's clearly more partisan. Well, obviously, it's the most partisan issue of the day. So, yeah, I see what you mean there. And I admit I can see it happening in reality as well, because I look at the climate protests, and even I this is probably unpopular for people listening, but even I sympathise with them a little bit. Maybe because they're behaving like radicals, and I like that, or because I actually sympathise with some of their aims, whatever. But I think you're right that Brexit is a harder issue to garner sympathy behind, but I also think that maybe there's a demographic thing here, because a lot of the people who got arrested on these climate protests are kind of young student types. They don't have much to lose, whereas Brexiteers tend to be a little bit older. They've got a bit more responsibility in life. They got kids, they got a mortgage, whatever, and a job, and they don't want to put that at risk with violent protest.
Yeah, and very few climate protesters run the risk of being called a racist or an Islamophobe or whatever. If they were to be exposed, so if their details were to be released online as a climate, for want of a better phrase, a climate extremist, they are probably much less likely to be fired by their employer than somebody who takes a hard stance, on Brexit. Like you said, they've got far more to lose, because it's a less noble cause. The kind of combination makes it a much more risky thing to take an openly, potentially law-breaking stance.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of perception involved here, because, of course, one could argue that upholding democracy is very moral and upstanding, but I see what you mean, that it's not going to be perceived that way in the public consciousness, unfortunately. But that is the reality. But I guess this kind of leads us on to our next topic, our other topic of the day, which, of course, are two prospective candidates for UKIP in the upcoming European elections in the UK. We've got Carl Benjamin, who I believe is the one who everyone would know as Sargon of Akkad from YouTube, and Mike Meacham, I think his name is.
Marcus Meekin.
Marcus Meekum.
Marcus Meekin, yeah, not Mike Meekin. I think you're confusing him with Mike Stuckbury.
That's unfortunate. Well, apologies for my lazy research there, but but anyway, him who I do know as Count Dankula, so I'll just call him Count Dankula, I think. But anyway, the two of them are standing for UKIP, and I think they both announced it quite recently. And Darth, I don't know if you want to add any more detail to that you probably know more than me.
Yeah, I mean, so for anybody who has been living under a rock for the last few years, Count Dankula was thrown into the limelight after being arrested in 2016 for filming his infamous YouTube video where he gets his dog to see Kyle whilst shouting "See Kyle" and shouting "Gas the Jews." He was arrested from his home address in Coatbridge and was subsequently found guilty in court and fined £800 for his hate speech, internet hate speech laws under Section 127 of the Communications Act, which has become an extremely kind of unpopular piece of legislation across the country. And he basically took a stance and said he wasn't going to pay that fine out of principle because he was exercising his free speech. And apparently the money was taken out of his account without his knowledge or permission anyway. And I think that was ultimately the powers that be knew that if they arrested him, he was going to become somewhat of a martyr, something similar to like Tommy Robinson. So they just decided to pull the money out of his account and be done with it. Carl Benjamin, or Sargon of Akkad, he's been around for about 5 years now. He's close to 1 million subscribers on YouTube. He is a self-professed classic liberal, and he openly, from what I can see, openly opposes both the far left and far right, and is openly anti-political correctness. And he came to controversy, and this is being batted about now that he's become a candidate for an MEP after tweeting at Jess Phillips saying, "I wouldn't even rape you," after she stated that rape threats were a commonplace for her. This was back in 2016. So both of them under clouds of controversy, I suppose one more so than the other. But I think what is, I think what is interesting about this is we're now seeing people who ultimately have as much influence and followers as some mainstream media outlets.
Yeah, that's an interesting dimension of it, I think, because it's kind of surreal, really, to have YouTubers standing as MEP candidates. I mean, I know in Italy with the 5-star movement, they're a bit more tech savvy with their politics, but in this country, it's kind of unusual. You normally expect the suited and booted career politicians or the bankers or something. So it's a very unusual state of affairs. I mean, the problem is it's a shame, really, that the Brexit Party is doing so well, because it means that people like Sargon and Count Dankula are not going to get as much attention in this as they should, because they're doing it for a good cause. But do you think that, actually this might be a bit of an anticlimax, and they won't get it won't draw attention to the issues because they're not gonna do very well?
I mean, Sargon has said himself that he doesn't expect to be elected. He says he'll be astounded if he does get elected. But I think the fact that he is now being pushed into the limelight, and probably wants to be pushed into the limelight just to draw attention to the issues which he and Count Dankula are standing against. The main thing really that both of them seem to be pushing against is the authoritarian state that we are rapidly moving into. 1984 becoming a reality. Words and phrases are now enough to land you a night in the cell and potentially get you a prison sentence. Political correctness is rampant, and people are losing their careers over words and phrases. That alone is bad. And then obviously you've got what the EU are doing with their, again, increasingly authoritarian laws, Article 13, Article 11. These kind of things. I really don't think people, that your normal people in society see as issues. And then I I'll tell people and explain to people why these are problems, and then they go, right, it makes sense now. I understand. Like you say to a normal uneducated person, and you'll say something and it clicks in their head, and suddenly it makes a little bit more sense. And I think that alone, hopefully, will draw. Them standing as MEPs will draw attention to these problems.
I hope so, because particularly Article 13, because it is a European election and that's a European piece of legislation. So, I mean, that's something that really does need attention drawing to it. And I think you're right that generally most people, most educated people who can think critically will, when they see the reality of this and Article 13 and how it works, and also the other the political correctness laws, if you like, in this country and in Europe as a whole, people do dislike it. They are frightened by it. But the problem is that the vast majority of people, all they're going to see are the headlines saying, Nazi dogman and rape threat YouTuber stand for UKIP, and then people's minds, the vast majority of people's minds, will just switch off to it then. And I think we're seeing a real example of how the media uses its power to influence.
And I totally agree with you. However, to play devil's advocate, the mainstream media is more and more and more being viewed in an increasingly skeptical light, both here and in the US. For anybody who's interested in another YouTuber, Tim Pool, I follow him on US matters, and he covers a lot of UK stuff as well, but he regularly covers the downfall of the left-wing news outlets in the States. You're getting CNN and MSNBC are getting something like 50,000 people watching them on a single hour, so tiny amounts of people compared to what they were. And it's because they are, reporting increasingly hysterical and false stories. And people are slowly but surely beginning to realize, look, these guys are talking through a hole in their head. And, they're losing people because they're printing what they want people to think, So you've got the London bubble, the London mainstream media outlets, and they are telling people what they should and shouldn't think and what they should and shouldn't stand for. And these guys are coming along, and they have their sponsors, or they have people who are directly funding them, and they're refusing to bow down to these mainstream media outlets, basically telling them this is how you must act, and they're putting two fingers up to them and saying, no, I'm not doing it because I've got principles and I have people who will back me because they believe what I believe. We are not having to tiptoe around political parties and be told what to do. So it'll be interesting to see if they continue this stance now that they're part of the UKIP and they're part of a political party.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And I think you're right about, I see your point about the media, because I think especially in the States, more people, 10 times more people tune into Joe Rogan's podcast than they do to CNN. And that's quite remarkable. I'm not sure, in this country, I think one of the problems that we have is that people are switching off the mainstream media, but they're not really tuning into anything else either. There's a lot of escapism, I think. And so, yeah, it's hard to predict where it's going to go. I don't even know what constituencies they're in. I think Carl Benjamin is in the southwest or something like that.
Yeah, so he actually has said, and this is interesting, his so-called constituency also takes in Gibraltar. So he's going to travel over to Gibraltar and speak with people out there. And I mean, I imagine you're not going to get many other MEP candidates who are going to travel over to a rock in the middle, in between Spain and Africa to speak to a small amount of people.
Well, it's also the same constituency that Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister or cousin or whatever it is standing in, isn't it?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's Adonis as well, Lord Adonis, the Labour dude, is also in that constituency. So it's quite a high-profile constituency considering the names that are involved in it. So that might be useful for old Carl.
I mean, as somebody's pointed out on the YouTube chat, Gibraltar was the most pro-Remain constituency in the UK.
Yeah.
I remember the results coming in on that. First because obviously there's such a small population, but I think, as I've heard people point out, if Labour, I think Corbyn has said that he, without saying it, I think he would be open to giving up Gibraltar through discussions, and if that is the case and Labour do get into power, then I can see Gibraltar all of a sudden, becoming pro-Brexit if Labour were to get into power. But I haven't done a whole lot of research into that.
Yeah, I think Gibraltar's a lot like Northern Ireland, really. The political union of primary importance is the United Kingdom, and then they would probably go with whatever would keep their sovereignty intact under the UK's aegis, if you like. I forgot what I was going to say about that now. Actually, this is kind of related, but not 100%. What do you think of the Brexit Party?
Well, the one thing that I hadn't realised up till a few days ago was that it's really not a kind of party compared to it's quite a different compared to the other parties, in the sense of what I understand, its members are subscribers. They basically pay a subscription to the party. There isn't so much kind of a, you're a member, you subscribe to the party, and it seems to be, it's, from what I understand, and I may be guilty of falling into propaganda here, but it's kind of Nigel Farage is a one-man band. And I think, that in of itself, may have its positives and its negatives. But I from what I understand, it's not quite different to the rest of the political parties.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a different format. Like you say, they don't really have members; they have subscribers. There's some funny things as well, because it is very much a Nigel Farage show. There's that Richard Tice, is it, the businessman who's the chairman, and then there was the founder who had to resign because some allegedly Islamophobic tweets of hers surfaced. But she was literally a currency speculator. So yeah, it's very much I see it as like the establishment choice for Brexit parties. Although I have to say that they're doing well, and I think a vote for them isn't a bad thing in this instance, because it's reinforcing the message that Brexit is popular.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, I think the Brexit Party has become your party for mostly ex-Conservatives. I mean, in all honesty, I wouldn't vote for them, but I would rather vote for them over this new Cuck Party.
Cuck.
I just change UK Party, I believe it is.
That's right. I just find it funny that it is literally an anagram of cuck, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you think they could not. I mean, those are the kind of things that makes me all the more certain that none of the people in that party have any online presence whatsoever, because they would understand. You'd think they would understand basic memes, but when they're literally calling a party after what is effectively a meme, and it turns himself into a meme, that they clearly have no idea what they're doing in regard to the internet. And I think just to kind of circle back, I think this is what you're seeing. The politicians and political candidates which are gaining the most popularity right now are the ones who are tech savvy and who are social media savvy. As much as a hater, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez uses Instagram live streams, and she does it in a way that makes it seem natural. Whereas I remember when Elizabeth Warren, she was doing her US presidency and she was announcing it, she did this Instagram stream, and it looked so fake and false and forced, and people were commenting on that. And I think people who are tech savvy, like you're saying about the Italians, they're the ones who are going to attract the most attention in this rapidly changing political climate.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's why Green issues are doing well. I think the Labour Party are doing better than they should be because of this as well. They've got young tech-savvy members. And the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage is always, I don't know how good he is with tech, but he's always surrounded himself with people who know, the ins and outs of social media. So I think it plays out. Whereas the Conservative Party, and they're clearly miles behind in that respect. Change UK, they clearly have no advice on this, because you'd have thought, like you said, somebody would have said to them, who's text, look, guys, you can't call your party that. You just can't. So
and they had a different name originally, and then they changed it to the Cuck Party, from what I understand.
They were called. Well, they called themselves the Independent Group, didn't they?
Yeah, and then they changed it to Change UK, and people were immediately like, "You guys really have stuck your foot in it here." So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, ultimately, the fact that we're having MEP elections is sad in of itself, because it kind of highlights the fact that we're seem to be less and less likely to leave the European Union. So you're of course then going to get more and more EU skeptics running for power, but if nothing more than just to cause disruption in the EU Parliament.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, the Brexit Party is doing well in the polls at the moment. They're leading the polls for the European election, and somebody in the chat, disappointed Englishman's voting UKIP. I think Brexit Party is designed to stop populism. That's probably true, but I think the most important thing in this election is to send as many Eurosceptic members to the European Parliament, because whether they're of the Brexit Party or of UKIP, because it's important to reinforce the message that the opinion of the British people has not changed regarding the European Union. I would hate to see a load of Remainers returned, which would give the Cuck people, the Cuck Party, fuel to say, oh, well, look, that means we need a second referendum. So I'm just going to the chat briefly as well. Blackwater Park asks, can one of you fake a Yorkshire accent?
Something tells me that some of the audience are missing our female usual, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and say that you're going to have a better accent than I am, simply because you're English and I'm not.
I've got to say, I can't do it. Funnily enough, I can do a better Scottish accent than a Yorkshire accent. So, but I'm not even going to attempt either on air, unfortunately.
No, so, neither am I.
Apologies to the person who who's missing Laura. I'm sure she'll be back with you soon.
Can I just? This is totally out the blue here, not planned. I don't think we were on air last week, obviously, and we had the burning, the fire in Paris of the cathedral, which has briefly escaped my mind the name of the cathedral, which is
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. That's the one. I just wanted to kind of touch on it. I think it's really sad to see, and it's kind of been further highlighted with this attack in Sri Lanka. Again, I know it's not kind of European news, but there's this very evident, metaphorical attack on, Western Christian values right now, and it's showing with, people, the ashes were hardly cold, and people were talking about how we should rebuild Notre Dame to make it look as different as possible to annoy, quote unquote, the alt-right, to get it up them. You've got a building that stood for over 800 years, and because it went on fire, we should change it to get rid of the white European culture that is metaphorically stood inside it.
Yeah, I think I was really affected by the Notre Dame fire, actually, because more so than terrorist attacks, because it's whether you're a Christian or not, it's a very, and I'm not, but it's a symbol of European civilization. It's so old, and it's just so European. It's the very heart of Europe. So it's such a tragedy that it's been burned down, and it's also even more of a tragedy that, like you say, people want to deface it in the rebuild.
Yeah, and for interest's sake, what I found was really, really cool. I think one of the Assassin's Creed games has Notre Dame in it, with the exception of the spire. And I think the people who created the game have basically said that were willing to offer effectively the blueprints in which they used to design Notre Dame in the game, because it is apparently very, very accurate in comparison to the building, to allow them to help rebuild Notre Dame as it was. But you're already having people saying, we should put a glass roof in it and do all these different things. And, you've obviously got people who are going to make memes out of it. But I think it's really sad that people are, the ashes are hardly cold, and people are talking about how we should, completely change it because Notre Dame doesn't reflect the diverse society that we have now. And, it's just, to me, it's just like this metaphorical destruction in a building of Western civilization. And the closest thing I could draw it to was, you had the difference when the European powers marched off to war during World War One, and you had the French army were going to war with their steel breastplates, their blue jackets, their red trousers. All of the armies had cloth caps at the start of the war, and by the time the war ended, there were these very industrial powers with tanks, and the whole concept of war had totally changed, and the cultures had very much changed from the old world into the new world. And I kind of, when I saw Notre Dame burning, I saw a bit of a comparison there. Of, you have the old world, the old kind of part of Europe, old European culture being destroyed before our eyes, and it's twice as sad because it's attached to what is the Western religion of Christianity.
Yeah, and I think I think I tweeted something about this at the time, that it is such a good metaphor for what's going on at the moment, because you see Notre Dame on your television literally on fire, and it's a good metaphor for Western civilization, because that's exactly what's happening all around us. And we can't talk about this without me mentioning some of the comments that I saw about Notre Dame, particularly from the Jewish Worker account, Jewish Socialist account, where the first thing they do is not bemoan the loss of this incredible artifact, but bemoan the fact that, oh well, we're glad it's burning because it was anti-Semitic and these sorts of things. And of course, they're probably going to hire some architects of the same nature to like you said, put a glass roof on it, or add some tumor-like structure that is allegedly modern but really just looks disgusting. And that would be such a shame.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to draw a comparison, I mean, can you imagine if I don't know of the world's biggest synagogue or world's most kind of influential synagogue or mosque, if one of them was affected by either a terrorist attack or a natural disaster or fire, you would not get the same kind of reaction, both from the media and from your kind of religious skeptics. People would say, it's a tragedy that such a large piece of religious history is destroyed, and this is a tragedy that this happens. And you have one of probably two of the most iconic chapels in the world, the other one being in the Vatican. It's almost being celebrated.
Yeah, it's a great shame that people think of it in that way. And I was just thinking, when you were talking, when you mentioned synagogues and mosques, that, for instance, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, I think, that's a beautiful building, and we can have our differences with Islam, but it would be a shame if that burned down. And I don't think anybody would seriously say, oh well, you know, we should add a glass roof or something to make it modern. It would want, everybody in the world would want it restored sympathetically because of the historic nature of it. So yeah, I mean, I really don't like some of the conversation around it, like you said, about the way people are trying to use it as a political football to, let's make it look awful to own the racists kind of thing. It's really sad.
And I think from now on, any kind of disaster or issue surrounding some kind of culturally important building or area or whatever, if it's affected in any way in which it is forced to be changed, whether through a disaster or whatever, there are going to be people saying, oh, well, we should just change it, we should just, get rid of it altogether because it just highlights this racist Western history in which we need to get away from, when they fail to see that, for all of its failures, Western society is probably the pinnacle of, human advancement in the sense of democracy and, the ability for, whether you agree with it or not, the ability of, cultures being able to somewhat exist together. Obviously it has all its problems of multiculturalism, but in all other parts of the world, you do not see multiculturalism. But people are saying that we are the most racist parts of the world, and we have to have our societies burned down and rebuilt from the ashes. But they all want to come here.
Well, such is clown world, I'm afraid. Honk honk.
Exactly.
I mean, it is, the contradictions there are marvelous to behold. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, I think. But yeah, I'm glad we talked about Notre Dame, because obviously it wasn't on the agenda, but I'm glad you raised it because it's an important issue that we haven't spoken about on the podcast yet. So, maybe it's probably something that we're going to come back to when an architect is assigned to rectify the damage. We'll probably come back to it because I'm sure there'll be some points of contention there. So I think, we're going to wrap up now, I think, because we've been on for a while, and we've done the issues that we spoke about. Before we do, I'd just like to say to everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with us over the last few weeks. It's been a bit topsy-turvy, but we're going to get back onto a regular schedule now, I think. And of course, if you want to help us out, hit like and subscribe. There's also some links in the description below if you want to give us a small donation to help us to continue to do what we do. It's very much appreciated, and it will all go to furthering the organization. So thank you for listening. I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks for joining me, Darth, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, William. Thanks, guys, for listening. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.